would like to know about the project. Do you have any questions for me at the moment before I get started, and I can just make sure that I address those? There's a few.
Where can I buy this CentOS thing?
So have your credit card number ready and call 0800. We offer a 15-day money-back guarantee as well.
It's about Xen support, because
Okay.
a lot of distros seems to move towards KVM, so it's to get some visibility on that.
Okay. So the question was about Xen. Okay. This is something. Someone at the back.
So there was a big delay between Red Hat 6 and CentOS 6 getting released. Is that going to happen again with 7, or is?
Okay. I'm happy to address that. Yeah. That's.
Same question? Okay.
And just a question about the release tree structure. You specifically don't you only maintain updates for the latest version. So there's no if I have a 6.2 original system and want to update to the latest version of 6.2, which is equivalent to either Red Hat or Scientific Linux, there is no tree for each of the versions, and whether or not you'd consider actually reintroducing that. I don't know if you used. I seem to recall that you used to do that. You used to have a 5.3, 5.4 tree, but now it's just a 5 latest tree and a 6.4 latest tree. Whether you'd actually do something which tracked the released versions.
Okay. I'm happy to. Yeah. I think we can include that in as well. So how many people here know what CentOS is? Okay. So how many people here know what the difference between CentOS and CentOS Linux is? So I'm guessing the two people here who are raising their hands are the two people who've been to one of my previous talks. One of the things that comes up often. Do you mind if I actually just turn this off? No. Because I'm like, the left side of me is about 4 degrees higher than the right side of me. So one of the things that's always caused a bit of confusion, and something that a lot of us on the other side, on the privileged side, let's say, of the system have always assumed, is that there is a very clear and a very distinct message about what CentOS is, as in the CentOS project is, and what CentOS Linux is. Whereas I think there isn't really that much of perception, there isn't really that much of understanding in terms of differences between the two. So the easy way to look at it is the CentOS project, which is CentOS, produces, amongst other things, the CentOS Linux distribution, which is then used by other people. Right? So CentOS is actually the project, and CentOS Linux is actually the distribution that is produced by the project. All right, Justin.
What else does CentOS do? That's the question.
It's 5 minutes down the road. I will address that question. So in 2003, 2004, Red Hat decided that they were going to change the way they pushed out what was at that time Red Hat Linux, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux came up. There were some people who saw the value in that. They saw the value in being able to give Red Hat a little bit of money and then having a phone number they could call and get some support. But then there were other people who were in a position where they were doing strange things to the distribution that Red Hat was not very happy to support, or they were doing things to the distribution where Red Hat wanted. It was basically a case of, let's get the gold out, because that's how much it's going to cost you if Red Hat was going to support this kind of a thing. And I happened to be in a situation where the employers I was working with, the people I was working with at the time, we were doing some strange things like building MySQL with the Intel compiler. We were using a real-time kernel. We had some strange things going on, and we had like a sharded MySQL setup way back in 2004, 2005, which was a setup that Red Hat was not happy to support, or they were happy to support if we were happy to offload like a couple of $1 million a year. For a 4-man company who weren't turning over a couple of $1 million a year, that was not going to happen, right? But then it's easy to perceive why Red Hat was doing what they were doing. We had a distribution which wasn't their distribution really. We were doing stuff to code which they would have had to support just specifically for us. And in the search, as to what do, we tried Debian, which lasted about 2 days. We couldn't find how to start Apache. We're like, I'm sure it's in here somewhere, right? Who can find it? So basically, the organization I was working with was very heavily embedded in the Red Hat mindset, right? And I went around and discovered something called White Box Linux, which John Morris was doing at the time, and we tried to install it, worked well. There were a few issues. We wanted to do things. We wanted to be able to help out. We were looking to build a community around it, and he wasn't happy to do that. Things were slow. Things didn't happen in time. And then somebody pointed me to CentOS Linux, and which is when I kind of, 2005, late 2005 is when I joined the project and started doing things. I'm sure most people here know what CentOS is, so just as a brief, a minute introduction to CentOS. We released, so CentOS 3.3 was the first proper release. I think this was back in September 2004. And we thought, hey, if 100 people use this, we would say we're very, very successful. And then 500 people proceeded to download it within the first couple of weeks of release. So we're like, okay, this is good. When we did 3.4, there was an understanding that, hey, if we can hit 2,000 users, we would be very successful. And about 15,000 people downloaded it. So we're like, okay, maybe there is a bit of a gap in the market. Maybe there is a bit of a gap, and maybe we've been able to engage with the right set of people, and we've been able to deliver something which has some value, right, to some set of people. We don't know who they are or what they do. And then hop, skip, and jump later, we're in a position where, there's millions of people downloading CentOS now. There's quite a few people who use it. It's pretty well known. We're pretty widely established, I would say, as a general purpose Linux distribution. And I think most people would probably agree with that. We have lots of traction in specific communities, right? And then we have some traction in the general overall computing ecosystem. So places like HPC, for example, CentOS is very strong. There's a number of the top 100 supercomputers of the world which run CentOS today. There's at least a few people here that I know who do HPC work and are here probably because they use CentOS, so they know what it is. We've also had a lot of traction in hosting. To a point where I believe, this is perhaps harder to quantify, but I believe about 41 to 42% of the internet runs off CentOS today, which is not a small number. It's a pretty big deal. I also believe, and this is again anecdotally collected information, that a very large chunk of VoIP traffic worldwide runs on CentOS machines. That's again something we consider to be, an area that we've been widely successful in. I haven't really heard the question, but the answer is yes.
The Netcraft guys do I think it's monthly survey where, they probe the Apache servers, as many as they can find. And it says what the OS is, and they generally consider that to be somewhat reliable. Do you have the stats roughly out of that?
There is a couple of people who do this. So there's a company called W3 Techs, which does a survey. But they extrapolate their results based on the first 1 million servers that they hit. Now, if you really think about it, 1 million is not a big number when it comes to domain names. And we know that there are some very large hosting companies like GoDaddy who run their domain parking stuff on CentOS. And I'm pretty sure there's more than just 1 million domains just on that one particular survey, or just on that one particular service. So I don't think there is any easy way of coming up with a number. Like Etsy has thousands of servers. Would you count that as one domain, or would you count that as thousands of servers? So how we kind of do our numbers is we extrapolate based on the unique IPs that are hitting the mirror services on CentOS, and then going back from there and then making assumptions about things. It's easier to do on IPv6 than it is on IPv4, because it's just the way IPv6 works. But I mean, I don't think anybody can really confirm what the number is, but those are the numbers that we believe in at the moment. So again, another vertical that we've been very successful in is the solution delivery platforms. People doing specific applications like control panels, or monitoring systems or whatever. And then a lot of those guys have come across and used CentOS as a base to do their work on. And this includes like large appliance manufacturers as well. People selling storage solutions where your embedded platform has like 4 gigs of RAM and maybe 4 cores. Unlike my watch, which probably has like 8K of RAM. Not that kind of embedded, but embedded at a much larger scale. I almost lost my notes there. So from the project side of things, where are we right now? I think it's safe to assume that CentOS as a project is now feature complete as a Linux distribution incubation ecosystem. That's a few buzzwords. So what I'll tell you what that means. I consider distribution building to be orthogonal to packaging. How many packages you push does not directly map back to how good a distribution you can build, or how timely you can build it, or how well you can test it. Everybody's very, very still, I'm guessing. So do you want me to go into more details about? Individual package quality for a certain demographic has a higher impact than the number of packages available within a distribution. Which I believe is what the whole value proposition of RHEL is as well. You know, that the primary differentiator between Ubuntu at Debian and RHEL CentOS is that you don't really have everything in the kitchen sink in. But what you do have in there comes with a certain set of assertions, comes with a certain set of assumptions that as a user you can make are going to be in place, which you can't do on the other side of the fence. So from our perspective, because all of the CentOS developers really have redhat.com email addresses, if you know what I mean, we were in a position where, and this kind of feeds back to why 6.0 was late. We were in a position where our build systems were set up in a way that we would build a particular source RPM. If it builds, you would ship it, right? But then when the CentOS ecosystem grew to a point where we knew that there were a lot of people doing some very critical stuff with CentOS, we started going down the path of doing some level of QA in-house, making sure that what we ship doesn't actually break stuff for anybody else. And this hit us really hard at the point when we were doing 6.0, because we were able to build 6.0 within a couple of days. Within about 3 or 4 days, we had 6.0. But we did not have a 6.0 that looked like what RHEL 6.0 did. And the opportunity that we had at that point was, hey, it builds, ship it, which is what a bunch of other people did. A bunch of the other rebuilds did that. It builds, ship it. We held back on that till such point as we knew that the 6.0 builds that we have are good enough that we would use it ourselves in-house on our own platforms and our own appliances, right? We did a couple of 5.x releases. I think we did 5.5 and 5.6 during the time we were waiting for 6, because that had a direct customer impact. There were people running CentOS 5.5, 5.6. They needed those updates, right? By delaying those, we were putting those people in a compromise where they could potentially have security holes or whatever, whereas nobody was using 6 at the time. So holding 6 back did not really have a direct impact on anybody out there from our perspective. And then there were other people, like Scientific Linux was there. They shipped something. How good or how bad that was, I don't know. We've had feedback that says good. We've had feedback that says wrong or bad or whatever. But the onus of that, or the onus of actually testing it, was up to the users. And if you thought that they gave you a good enough value with their builds, use it. But we didn't think that we had a 6.0 build that was good enough till such time as we did. And when we did, we released it. Now, how we cater to something like this is, when I say that we are feature complete in that ecosystem, is that we now have a process that can sanitize sources inbound, that can sanitize sources before they go into the build systems. We can build in a way that we can guarantee the build that is coming out has not been modified, has not been affected by the environment, and is not sort of in a position where it could be compromised. And then we have a process in place which verifies the resulting sources with the origin of sources. So effectively what we're doing is that if a build comes out, let's say you have a build for PHP, we can make sure that the sources which contributed to that build are exactly the same as the sources that went into the build, right? And then we have functional tests at the other end, and we have acceptance tests at the other end, and then we have release tests at the other end. And all of this stuff happens before packages are released. When packages are released, we have a process in place which tests what's been released, which keeps an eye on the mirrors, which keeps an eye on basically making sure that whatever is out there hasn't been compromised. So from that perspective, I consider that the CentOS ecosystem is feature complete from the distribution side of things. And there's a bunch of other stuff that also kind of contributes to being feature complete. We have a vibrant community at the moment. We have a fairly well-functional IRC channel. We have forums. We have support channels in various languages. I think 7 languages. There's a very active mailing list. The technical depth of that mailing list is phenomenal. There's a pretty good chance if you have an operational issue, there is somebody on that mailing list who's hit that before you. Or if they haven't, then they'll be able to help you work through that problem. And I think that's pretty key to the whole CentOS ecosystem as well. And what we also have that helps is that we have probably one of the most extensive infrastructure setups for any Linux distribution anywhere in the world at the moment. At peak time, we can actually scale up to about 1.8 to 2 terabytes per second worth of bandwidth that we can push out. And this is all thanks to the sponsor network and the automation that has gone into the background to make all of that stuff happen. Because as I'm sure a lot of you guys know, we don't pay for any of that bandwidth. All of that stuff is all been sponsored by various people, from hosting companies or or universities or people who've otherwise got some value out of CentOS. They've always come back and said, hey, can we give you 2 machines? Can we seed for you? Can we set on a torrent feed for you or whatever? So we don't actually pay for any of this bandwidth. And I think that's a pretty successful infrastructure setup there, right there. So that's where we are at the moment, right?
So as well as having an open source distribution, you can open source distribution network.
Yes. So just going into that a little bit more. So we were one of the very early adopters of Puppet. We've had Puppet running since I think 2008 or something. And we just treated every box and every component within the CentOS infrastructure as an appliance. So rather than treating the mirrors as physical computer machines, we just say, hey, treat this like an appliance. Your Puppet manifest should be good enough to take any random machine, make it into a mirror node, get the content onto it, and register itself as a mirror. What happens with that is, okay, different question. How many of you guys know what Chaos Monkey is? So a few people, right? So for everybody else, Chaos Monkey is this little application that the Netflix guys have that randomly goes around inflicting pain on your infrastructure by randomly turning off VMs, by randomly, causing corruption here, there, and stuff like that. So my pet peeve about that is when you have 100% donated, contributed infrastructure, you don't need Chaos Monkey because you've got donors, right? You'll have situations where, hey, hosting company, right? The guy will walk up to a machine, he'll say, hey, who's got this machine, rack 14, unit number 17. He'll look it up in his accounting system. It doesn't have a customer associated to it. He'll switch off the machine and sell it to somebody else, right? And then 3 days later or 2 days later, we're trying to work out, what happened to this machine? Where's this machine gone? So you raise a ticket and the guy's like, what machine? Or they'll be like, oh yeah, we didn't find any customer on it and we couldn't find any credit card information against it, so we've repurposed it, we sold it. And the classic thing is when we go into release mode, the machines end up hitting a lot of bandwidth, right? And a lot of them are 100 megabits, 150, 200 megabits. They'll end up saturating those links. Classic hosting company situation, right? Any machine hitting lots of bandwidth for more than half an hour, 40 minutes, go turn it off. Right, because they say, hey, this guy hasn't hit this kind of bandwidth in the last 3 weeks. His machine's probably been compromised, right? Somebody's got a backdoor, somebody's spamming it, turn it off. And here we are, trying to count our beans, really trying hard to make sure everything is in place, and suddenly our machine's falling off. And then 5, 6 of us will, sort of do like a schedule, and we'll all start getting onto the phones, we'll start getting onto emails, look, don't turn this machine off. And we now know who the hosting companies are who are going to do it. So before we do a release, we send them like a couple of days before that, hey, bandwidth's coming, keep an eye on this, don't turn the machine off. So yeah, so we've got a pretty effective, efficient open source infrastructure thing going as well. Let's see how we're doing for time. Okay. So that's kind of like where we are at the moment. We have the organization of the project is still quite loose. It's still based on merit. It's still based on an invite-only policy because we want to keep it very, very shallow. We want to be able to solve problems that really exist, right? We don't want to be developer-led. We don't want to be feature-led. We don't want people who are in a decision-making situation who are actually sitting and writing code. Because as developers here would know, that's a very slippery slope to be on. Because there are other opportunities, there are other avenues like Fedora, like Debian, like Ubuntu, where you can go away and do that kind of stuff. If you don't like PXE, you don't like IPXE, you want your own new system of doing it, there are other places where you can go and do this. We don't want you doing this in CentOS. But if let's say there's a networking issue with the particular Ethernet interface which people have deployed out there, then we want to fix that. So what we do is we try and create a system where we try and create an ecosystem where our entire QA team represents people who really use CentOS in various kind of environments. So we've got people who use CentOS on desktops. We've got a couple of guys who use it at scale, thousands of machines. We've got people who use it on their home servers. We've got a couple of machines who basically just use CentOS because they're a part of the CentOS community. And they otherwise might be doing other stuff like running Windows or whatever. But it helps us represent a good user base within the QA system, within the QA team. Similarly, for the build side of things, everybody who's in a privileged position are people who use CentOS at their day jobs. We don't have a situation where, you have like Fedora guys or we have like people who use Windows all the time or Mac OS X all the time who don't actually have exposure to CentOS. Like one of the pet peeves that I had for a long time was that, hey, Yum is slow. And I had that perception because I was using it. But I was in a position where I could do something about it. The whole mirrorless stuff that we did and how we did it and how we manage it as well is based on how we perceived Yum and on the experiences that we had with Yum working in various places. And we like to keep that whole process shallow. We want the focus to be about the user rather than being about the developer and hey, having whiz-bang features and all that kind of stuff. Does that kind of make sense? Does that tie into what people most perception is? Justin's got another question.
Full of questions.
I see Paul is sitting right next to him to pass the mic across.
Do you guys have a graphic designer in your team? Because really, the CentOS website, I mean...
That's interesting because that brings me right back to my next point,
cool.
which was, that's kind of like where we are. That's like a woolly picture of where we are, right? So stuff that is ongoing now, things that we're changing, things that we're growing right now. Point number one, we have a new website under construction. Because 1975 called and they wanted their website back. And we thought we've hung on to it long enough. We may as well give it back to them. It was supposed to have been done in May, but we've had the designer, the lady who's working on it, had a few issues and stuff, but it's ongoing. We had a layout come through, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, where we've seen some stuff, and I think by the end of this month we should have something up there, which is quite cool. What we're also doing is to help sort of highlight the message about the CentOS project not being the same as the CentOS Linux distribution. We're going to make www.centos.org be about the project. So all of the applications that we run, for example, the mirrorless stuff or the wiki stuff, all of those things go into www.centos.org. And all of the documentation about the Linux distribution is going to move to wiki.centos.org. And we'll open up access control around the wiki, allowing more people to get involved and more people to write documentation and stuff like that. So that's pretty high up on the agenda. Hi, God.
I've got a question about, you said that you do extensive QA on top of the sources that come back in.
Right.
That sort of implies that you actually have patches in CentOS that are not upstream. So does that introduce binary incompatibilities with the upstream distribution with which the binary compatibility is claimed?
That's a good question. So it's a case of, when you do QA, it's a case of quantifying what it is that you're testing, right? So when we say that we're 100% binary compatible with RHEL, we can never be, because we can never really reproduce the build environment, and we can never reproduce the ecosystem that the builds ran under, right? So it's a case of working out what that actually means. Now, I'll give you a specific example, right? There are certain places where we can never be compatible with RHEL. Number one on that is the installer, because we have to build an installer, right? We can't take that installer. An installer is binary. The Anaconda code that runs the syslinux stuff, the ISO Linux stuff that builds is binary. The PXE images are binary, right? So we have to build those in-house. So we have to test them to make sure that they satisfy the requirements that we're building them for. I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit and say, because I'm the guy responsible for building the ISOs, it's not uncommon for the first 30, 40 builds of ours to not actually install. So we have a Blade Center, which has a PXE environment that we can throw ISOs at, which does the expansion, and it goes through about maybe 100, 150 different installation setups. Like we'll do PXE, we'll do HTTP based stuff, we'll do NFS stuff, we'll do ISOs, we'll do IPXE, then we do it on physical 32-bit, physical 64-bit, we do it on VMware, 32-bit, 64-bit, we do it on VirtualBox, we do it on KVM, we do it on a couple of other hypervisors that I won't mention here. But the point is to make sure that, hey, when we ship an ISO, we need to be fairly confident that this is actually going to install, right? So things like, I don't know, I'm going to further stick my neck out and say that 6.2 was not installable on Dell hardware which had EFI 2.1 or newer enabled on that hardware, because that was something we weren't testing for. RHEL 6.2 was installable on that. And Anaconda does not actually create the resulting images that you need for the EFI boot stuff. We had to do that manually. But it's when we got a bug report, we're like, hey, somebody better write a test for this to make sure we don't forget this next time. So what happens is that the test system, the test suite, the test ecosystem itself grows organically. Sorry, just to give, this is the second thing that we are not binary compatible with Red Hat, and we can't be, is the way we deliver patches. Because Red Hat delivers it through RHN, which we don't have access to. So not only do we neuter the RHN access points within the distribution, we actually remove a lot of stuff, which specifically points to RHN. Yum in a different kind of setup. So even if you're using Yum on RHEL 6, you'd assume that the patch delivery mechanism is the same as what you're getting with Yum on CentOS 6, but it's not. Because the way you're hitting the repositories that you're hitting, and the contents of those repositories are different from what you get on RHEL 6. So that's again something we have to test very extensively. So the third part of it is that there are various objects that are influenced by the build environment. For example, what would be an easy thing to quantify? Okay, so Xorg, right? So you build Xorg. Xorg takes on metadata at build time from the environment that it was built in, which includes the kernel that was running at the time, the glibc that it was linked against, the GCC installed in the chroots, the glibc in the chroots, and what headers it was linking against. based on what we end up with, we could end up in a situation where an NVIDIA driver, which builds and loads for RHEL 6 or say 6.3 update as of 1st of September 2011, does not build for the same point in time against CentOS 6. So we have to test for that stuff, just to make sure that what we deliver is not only something which builds and works, but it builds and works and looks like what the RHEL stuff looks like. This was easier in a previous life when we could just get the RHEL binaries and do a RPM compare. But AUPs, TNCs, AUPs around TNCs, TNCs around AUPs, etc., now mean that we don't actually have access to RHL binaries anymore, which is why we've gone down the route of having our own functional test suite. We've gone down the route of having our own installation test suite. We've gone down the route of having our own release time test suite, because we need to be able to do simple things like, hey, I built an update. Does this actually update the previous version of the same package? Because sometimes you have, and it's just like Linux, right? I'm sure we all know how this works. There's no such thing as PHP 56, which should be newer than PHP 55, right? It is PHP 5.1.6-EL6.32.15.6.4.1.git 2016.4.1.rpm. -3, yeah. So simple things like that, right? We need to make sure that these things work. So we have to test for these. The other part of it, the other thing which is my classic pet peeve is RPM has this concept of multilib, where you can have certain packages installed 32-bit and 64-bit at the same time. And then you can have userland tools which are built against 32-bit libraries of something which you have 64-bit for. For example, zlib, right? So you can actually build a little piece of code that you wrote which uses 32-bit zlib, right? And you can have 64-bit zlib devel and 32-bit zlib devel installed. How RPM works out that payloads are compatible is by doing MD5s of common payload between the 64-bit and the 32-bit RPMs, right? Does that make sense to most people? Do you want me to explain that? No? Okay, so let's say there's an RPM called ABC which has a man page, right? So when you run man ABC, you should see what's in the man page, right? But now let's say this package exists for 64-bit and 32-bit, and you can install both, right? Now RPM will let you install both as long as that man page has the same MD5 in the 64-bit and the 32-bit RPM. Otherwise it'll say, hey, file, whatever, blah, 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 user lib man, this thing conflicts with that page. So we have to test for that. We have to test that, when we did the build. And sometimes it's funny, or rather ironically funny, when you have a 64 build that took place at 1 minute to midnight, and the 32-bit build which took place 2 minutes past midnight, and has different metadata around the man page, around the doxygen stuff which generated the man page, and you have different MD5s, and that won't install. We've had situations where Red Hat built a package in November of a year. Well, remember 2012. I'm sure somebody from Red Hat is watching this and they're going to figure out what I'm talking about. They built a package in 2012 November, released it in February 2013 with an acceptance test suite included in the RPM, which said if the year is not 2012, fail. Now, when they built it, it was fine. Now, when we're building it, it's not so fine. And it took, I know Akimi probably worked, I think he's the one who worked out what the hell was going on here, because I was like, hey, this is like for a rainy day. Let me just get the other stuff out of the way. I have no idea what's going on here. And she went through the stuff and she found that, hey, look, there's a date issue. And then he went back to see when they released it, and they definitely released it in 2013. But the source RPM's build time was in 2012. So obviously it was built in 2012. And I did, okay, hey, this is not a hard test. Set a date, 2012, builds fine, installs fine. So at that point, then we do our build based on 2012, September. But what we also do is we remove all updates released from, I'm assuming, I don't remember the date off the top of my head. Let's say the 1st of November 2012, right? So when we did the build for that particular RPM, we rewound our entire build infrastructure back to the state of RPMs, the state of the repositories on the 1st of November, did that build, and that's fine. And that now looks, the sources also look exactly like what Red Hat has pushed out, and we release that. Does that kind of make sense? Does that explain why the whole there's a lot more. I can talk about this for a while, but that kind of highlights, I guess, where the whole testing thing comes from, right? So Justin has been getting very excited at the back.
No, I mean, I was just stretching my hands.
Sorry?
No, that's cool. I was going to ask, give us an example, but that is an example.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you actually introduce patches that would make it different. It just means that you adjust the build system till it gets it right.
Right. And in many cases, it's not a case of us adjusting the build system. It's a case of opening a bug report at bugzilla.redhat.com saying, dude, what happened here, right? And thankfully, it's these kind of things are accepted quite nicely and quite politely at Red Hat, so that's a good thing. So we've got the website stuff going on. The other thing that we've got going on right now are the CentOS Dojos, which is where we are here at the moment. We started off earlier this year to be small events, 60 to 70 people at the most, organized locally with speakers locally. Speakers are invited in to talk about what they're doing with CentOS and cool things about CentOS, rather than these being like sort of superstars standing here talking about like really cool stuff that they've done at scale that nobody else really works at, right? And problems that nobody else really has. Like a classic example of how the Dojos things work is what Mark was talking about, building CentOS images for the cloud. It's something that all of us are probably going to be doing at some point or the other. Or the stuff that John was talking about, the live series stuff and how cool it is and how easy it is. And he's got examples of doing that stuff. So we're hoping to bootstrap a lot more of these. And I can now reveal that we should be having one in London, which is actually in London, somewhere end of August. It'll be a smaller event. It may only be 30, 35 people, and the date's not quite confirmed yet. But yeah, keep your eyes out on that. We have something happening in Romania, early September, I believe the first weekend in September. In late October, we have something happening in Edinburgh. 8th of November, we are in Madrid. Late November, we are in Boston, maybe. There's a very interesting company trying to help us sort that out. I don't know what the relationship there is at the moment. And then in December, we have something happening in Delhi. And early January, we have something happening in Sydney. So lots of dojos coming up. Everybody should keep an eye out and come and be a part of as many of those as you can. And if you guys can help us actually do one wherever you are, I'm quite happy. I have a box, I have a bag, I have a laptop. I'm quite happy to travel to wherever you are and help you guys put it together and get that going. And that's for everybody. That's an open offer to everybody. Okay, so I'm going to try and rush through a few things because I'm guessing beer o'clock is fast approaching. So one of the reasons why I'm very keen on creating the differentiator between CentOS, the project, and CentOS, the Linux distribution, is that the CentOS Linux distribution comes with no guarantees, but it comes with the guarantee that there are no guarantees. It comes with an SLA that there are no SLAs. And it comes with an assurance that you're entitled to a 100% full refund in case things are not suitable. What that allows us to do is it allows us to get creative around the edges of the CentOS Linux distribution to solve problems that other people might have, even if it's in a niche, right? I know we've got a bunch of guys here, David is here, we've got a couple of people here from Zen. And that really highlights the sort of things that we want to get involved with. We've been able to work with them to curate, to build a Zen stack that works on CentOS 6, although Red Hat decided that that was not something they wanted to support. But because the Zen project is happy to get involved with us, and because we're able to, we have the infrastructure in place to set this up, to manage it, to patch it, to release it, and then maintain it, there's no reason why we shouldn't do it, right? The only blocker there is intent and time that people are willing to put into helping us work on that. I mean, from the project side of things, because it's all volunteer driven and because the privileged positions are very small in number and we want to try and keep it to that, what we do is we're trying to create an ecosystem using the Zen model, right? So we've used Zen as like a proof of concept as to how can we do this without breaking everybody's Linux install out there, right? And I think we've been able to do that fairly successfully. I don't think any strange people have come through and said, hey, where did this kernel come from? Or when did Zen get installed on my machine? But the people who wanted to install Zen have been able to find an easy way to do it. So we want to use that as a model and grow and do similar things around the project without actually affecting the thing that you guys care about most, which is binary compatibility with the upstream stuff. So without going into too many details, Zen for CentOS as a project exists. It's released out there. You can now install it. You can do some really cool stuff. The coolest thing to me is that Zen 4.2 on CentOS 6.4 gives you between 5 to 7.5% power consumption improvement over Zen 3 on CentOS 5.9. That's a tangible thing that's been measured, that's been certified, that's been clarified. Not certified, well, I've certified it. So, and that's a big win. And there are other wins as well, right? There are things that people can do and stuff like that. So the second thing that we've got going on at this moment in time is that there's a couple of people working on a high-performance LAMP stack. Okay, so before I go into that, let me just quantify one more thing which is kind of critical here. The way we've gone about bootstrapping the process of bringing up these alternative stacks is that we do the initial proof of concept privately. But we make a lot of noise and we say, hey, you guys want to come be a part of it? Come join this private mailing list. The reason why we don't want it to be public is because we want to make sure that we can actually deliver that stack before it goes into production. I think CentOS is in a place where a lot of people have a predetermined, they have this mindset, right? Hey, it's CentOS stable, comes from Red Hat, let's use it. Which, yeah, I mean, no. Stuff that isn't in the Linux distribution does not come with that, background. How we found out that this is painful is about 4 years ago, we released something called PHP 5.2 for CentOS 5 because CentOS 5 had 5.1.6 on it, and we released it to dev.centos.org and told everybody, if you have to ask us if you can use it, don't use it. Right? If you have to ask the question, which means you're not the target audience for a dev testing kind of an appliance. I remember, I think it was Ralph who went a couple of months later and said, hey, we should remove this stuff, This is getting used and people are talking about it and things. He did a Google search and it turned out that about 15,000 people were now linking to those RPMs from various places. And something like 30 or 40,000 different unique IPs were picking up metadata, repomd.xml file for that repository. And we're like, shit, that means we can't delete this anymore. Did we just inherit something that we don't want to inherit? And we had to remove it. And it would have broken stuff for people who were using 5.2 at the time. So we don't want to do that, which is why some of these stacks are being curated privately to a point where we can actually release something or have something which is at least in testing grade, right? The components that we're working on, the RPMs that we're building are all public. If you want to be a part of the testing group, join the CentOS devel list and feel free to pitch in, right? So having said that, things that we're working on right now, we have a high performance LAMP stack, which in testing has shown that we can get up to 160% faster than the default LAMP stack that is included in CentOS 6 at the moment. And we hope to have that out sort of fairly soon. How many people here know about an architect? Has anybody heard of Tyler? Tyler, okay, so a few people have. 142 cores in a 2U box, not very expensive, high performance stuff, but a dedicated architecture on its own, runs CentOS natively. They sell it with CentOS. That is something which is in the works. We hope to have that kind of in a release grade fairly soon. We have a PowerPC build going on right now. We hope to have that done by the first week of August. We hope to have Power 7 support for CentOS 6. First week of August. There is an ARM initiative that is kicking off now. I know there's some, like Gordon, there are people here who've been keen on having an ARM build, but we actually had a look at ARM a year and a half ago, and where ARM was didn't seem to fit in very well with where CentOS was, which was NAS boxes, plugs, watches, phones, tablets. It's not really where you want to be running Bluetooth services, for example, or you want to be running ISDN services or iSCSI services, right? Which is the kind of stuff that comes with by default on CentOS. Bluetooth. It's amazing. So people are talking about cloud stuff. We did an audit for a company that came across and said, hey, your images are insecure. So I went and logged in and we said, hey, give us an image. We found they were running Bluetooth services, they were running ISDN services, they were running things like SMB stuff in a cloud image. So I was like, when was the last time you connected a printer up to that VM? and the guy's like, hey, I didn't know. But yeah, so ARM is now getting to a point, especially with A15 and the 64-bit stuff and Zen being where it is on ARM, that is becoming very attractive to CentOS, and that's something we're looking to bootstrap up. If you guys are interested, please come in, join the effort, join the CentOS devel list, kick in. We have some hardware available by Calcida. They've given us some stuff. We have some more hardware coming through soon. We've got some level of developer support from a couple of upstream guys as well. We're trying to get a kernel bootstrapped up, so please feel free to come in and join the effort on that side as well.
So could you just repeat that, the 2U with multi-CPUs, and what was the name of that?
Tilera, Tilera. Well, this is only 2 sockets though. This is 72 cores per socket and doesn't have NUMA problems, and you can go to 7 terabytes of RAM. Whereas on ARM, you're still limited to about 2 to 4 gigs of RAM per core. But then that problem goes away with the 64-bit stuff coming through, right? Again, Tilera fixes a problem that most people don't have, right? Like if you've got a machine which can do that much of processing, you have to be very creative on how you get storage going for a box like that. Right? It's pointless if you have a 1U machine which needs a rack full of storage kit to service it, right? Or if you need like half a rack worth of Cisco kit to service the network side of that one box. So not everybody has that problem, but if you have that problem, then that's a great place to be. So I think just one bit, and then we can do the question bit. So so basically in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is we're trying to extend the CentOS project to a point where it becomes more of an ecosystem that allows other projects, that allows other people, other efforts to come in, work with us to be successful on and around the CentOS Linux distribution. And that's what the next challenge is, and that's what we're working towards for the next sort of 5-6 months time. So Mark had a question. I know we're running out of time as well.
I was just going to say, that sounds absolutely amazing, having a Tilera build of CentOS, and I can really see that being useful for quantum OpenFlow controllers. I can see that being a very specific area where you can get some pretty extreme performance out of it.
Yeah, I mean, so there are benchmarks there where they've done, and they've been able to get like 40 gigabits of DPI going through one box. So if you're the NSA, then I guess that's a good place to be. That's a good architecture to invest in. So the other thing that we're also trying to do is there's the CentOS Cloud initiative has been interesting in that a lot of people think there isn't one, but there's always been one. However, what we've been trying to do, and this is something that True and I work on quite, we try and be quite aggressive about this and stuff, is we've always said that, hey, you have a cloud instance, you want to buy a cloud instance, good. If you want to be on the cloud, if you've all seen the Microsoft ads, right, to the cloud, off you go. All the best for the future. But if you're looking to build a cloud, then we want CentOS to be one of the platforms that you consider. We don't want CentOS to be the platform of choice, but we want CentOS to be a platform that people consider when they go out to build a cloud. Because we think it's a brilliant place to be. We think that having the 6-year, 7-year, 8-year support cycle, yet being able to break the bits that you care about, put your own Ruby on there, nobody's going to have a problem with it. And you know that if you put your own Ruby on it, your own Ruby is the only piece of code you need to maintain. Everything else has a guaranteed ABI that's going to stay stable for the next 5 years, right? If you want your own PHP on there, put your own PHP. You want your own kernel on there, put your own kernel on there, and everything else is kind of guaranteed for a period of time. What we're now hoping to do in the next 5 to 6 months is change that a little bit to be that, hey, CentOS now has images. We're working with AWS, we're working with Rackspace, we're working with Google Compute Engine, we're working with a bunch of other people as well to try and curate CentOS images that work for those cloud systems, the off-premise public ones. But we're also working with a bunch of people, including Cat10, to try and get images which are usable within OpenStack, specifically for OpenStack, customized for OpenStack, or for CloudStack, or for Hyper-V even for that matter, or Azure. And that's something which is also coming through. That's like a pretty high priority thing that's coming through at the moment. And again, it's a part of, it fits into being a component of the CentOS project, which isn't a component of the CentOS Linux distribution, but curated around the CentOS Linux distribution. I have a bunch of other things, but let me just wind up by saying there are lots of opportunities for people to get involved. The easiest way to get involved is to find the piece of code that you care about the most. If you're a hosting company, you probably care about PXE booting. If you're a web services company, you probably care about Apache. Etsy, I guess, cares about LXC a little bit. So find something you care about and come join the open testing suite setup and write tests for the bits you care about, so that way you know that when we release, so let's say you care about Apache, write tests around Apache so that you know when we release a new version of Apache, it already satisfies your requirements. And the free win that we get is that if we can create large enough a contributor pool, we can basically cover at least 50% of the distribution. Some pieces are hard to cover, like there may not be a lot of people who use the entire cluster suite from end to end who are also involved here and be able to write tests which span like 6 machines or whatever, because our test suite can only run on 2 machines. But for the core components, things like sed, things like bash, things like zlib, things like PHP, Apache, Ruby, Python, it'll be great for people to come up and write tests around the applications that they care about. Even if it's WordPress, you can write a test in bash which does a wget wordpress.org/latest.tar.gz or whatever it's called, install it in the script, make sure it works. And then hey, every version of every update that we ship will always work with WordPress. If that test breaks, we will hold release back and investigate what's going on. That's an easy way for everybody to get involved. A second way for everybody to get involved, find something you care about a lot that isn't in CentOS Linux today. Right. Yeah, this is the guillotine. Okay. So find something that isn't in CentOS Linux today. Come work with us to make that happen. Because pretty much anything, you want a newer version of MySQL, you want a newer version of Postgres, you want a newer version of PHP, Ruby, whatever. We're quite happy to help, create a process that allows people to bring that in. Because if 4 people help with that, the 700 other people can also gain from it, right? And hopefully the ecosystem grows with it. So I will try not keeping you from beer much longer. For questions, come and find me. I'll be the guy with the heaps of meat on my plate. So thanks for coming along, guys. And thank you, Cat10, for sponsoring the whole thing. Where are the Cat10 guys? Can we see a few of them maybe? There's one in the back there, yeah. Thanks for bringing all of this stuff together. I know working with me is pretty hard because I go sort of missing for a few days and come back with like 10 points. Yes. I have been asked to inform everybody that we only have one set of chairs. That's the chairs you're sitting on. So as you guys move towards the barbecue, please take your chairs with you. So please just get the chairs and we'll see you on the other side.